You tell your child to share, you teach them to be fair, you model kindness at the dinner table. And yet, somehow, by the time they hit 10 years old, the way they cooperate with others is already locked in, not because of what you said, but because of what they watched you do, what they absorbed from your household culture, and 3 very specific mistakes most parents make without ever realizing it. A landmark study published in Science Advances in February 2026 followed 413 children across 5 completely different societies: urban America, rural Uganda, Canada, Peru, and Ecuador's Shuar indigenous community. Researchers from Boston College and Harvard, led by Dr. Dorsa Amir and her team, didn't just ask children what they believed about fairness. They tested it. 4 behavioral experiments, real consequences, real choices. And what they found should change how every parent thinks about the window they have to shape their child's moral compass. Here is the single most important insight from this entire body of research. Children do not develop fairness instincts from nowhere. They are not born with a fixed, universal sense of what is fair and what is not. Instead, their cooperative behavior is culturally sculpted, and that sculpting happens fast. By ages 8 to 10, children's behaviors and norms had already converged toward the specific cooperative patterns of their community. The adults around them were the blueprint. The home environment was the workshop. And the window, it appears to close right around middle childhood. That means the years between birth and roughly age 8 or 9 are not just formative. They are the formation. After that, you are no longer writing on a blank page. You are editing a document that is already mostly written. So let's talk about what you might be accidentally writing in the wrong direction. Here are 3 ways parents unintentionally damage their child's developing sense of fairness, and the principles that can help you course correct starting today. Principle 1, the outcome trap, teaching kids to win instead of cooperate. One of the most striking findings from this cross-cultural study was the identification of 3 distinct cooperative strategies children develop. Researchers called them maximization, generic cooperation, and partner-contingent cooperation. Maximizers prioritize their own outcome above everything else. They take the biggest share. They grab first. They optimize for personal gain. Generic cooperators always cooperate, regardless of what the other person has done. They share even when it costs them. They forgive quickly. They give the benefit of the doubt. And partner-contingent cooperators. This is the most sophisticated strategy. They cooperate based on the other person's past behavior. If you've been trustworthy with me, I'll work with you. If you haven't, I'll protect myself. This is nuanced, contextual moral reasoning. Now here's where the parenting mistake comes in. Many well-meaning parents, especially in highly competitive Western urban environments, inadvertently raise maximizers. Not because they sit their child down and say, always take the biggest piece, but because the subtle daily messages of the household, who gets praised, what success looks like, how conflict is resolved, consistently signal that getting the best outcome for yourself is the goal. Think about the language you use. Did you win? Who got the higher score? Make sure you get your fair share. These phrases seem neutral, even healthy, but repeated over thousands of interactions during early childhood, they build a mental model where life is a resource competition and the smart move is to maximize your position. Children in the rural Ugandan community in this study showed dramatically different cooperative patterns compared to children in urban America. Neither is inherently superior. Every community's norms evolved to serve that community's social structure. But the research makes clear that what American urban children were absorbing was significantly more maximizing in orientation. The fix is not to teach your child to be a pushover. Partner-contingent cooperation, cooperating based on trust and past behavior, is actually a highly adaptive, sophisticated social skill. The goal is to raise a child who can read social dynamics, extend trust thoughtfully, and cooperate strategically rather than one who defaults to what's in it for me. In practice, this means reframing how you celebrate success at home. Instead of only praising outcomes, the grade, the trophy, the win, start explicitly praising cooperative process. I noticed you waited for everyone to pick before you chose. That was really thoughtful. You made sure your partner had what they needed before you started. That's the kind of teammate people want to work with. You are not rewarding weakness. You are rewarding social intelligence. Principle 2, the norming gap. What you say versus what you do. This is the one that stings a little because it requires honesty. The study didn't just measure children's behavior. It also recruited 86 adult normative judges and 163 peer normative judges from each community. These were adults and children who were asked what the right thing to do was in various cooperative scenarios, what a good person should do when offered an unfair split, whether you should forgive someone who wronged you, how much you should share with a stranger. The finding? Adult norms in the community were among the strongest predictors of children's actual cooperative behavior. Not what adults told children to do, what adults actually believed and demonstrated as normal and acceptable. This is the norming gap. It is the distance between the moral instruction you give your child and the moral behavior they actually observe in your daily life. And children, especially between ages 4 and 8, are extraordinarily good at detecting that gap. They are watching whether what you preach matches what you practice. And when it doesn't, they don't default to the lesson. They default to the behavior. Here's a common example. A parent tells their child that it's important to share and be fair. But that same parent, when a neighbor asks to borrow something, is visibly reluctant, makes excuses, and later vents about it in the kitchen. The child hears the lesson, but they see the behavior. And in their developing brain, the behavior carries more weight, because behavior is what actually happens in the real world. Or consider how you handle conflict with your partner or co-parent. When there is a disagreement about something at home, who does more, who gets more say, how resources or time are allocated, are you modeling partner contingent fairness? Are you showing your child what it looks like to raise a concern about unfairness calmly, to listen to the other person's perspective, and to reach a resolution that both parties genuinely find acceptable? Or are you modeling maximization, fighting for your position, dismissing the other person's claims, and treating family life as a negotiation to be won? Children are building their internal model of what fairness looks like in practice, and they are building it from you. The Shuar community of Ecuador, one of the 5 societies in this study, showed particularly high rates of what researchers described as pro-social norm alignment between adults and children. The cooperative values the community held were deeply consistent across generations. Research on communities like this consistently points to one mechanism. Children are immersed in a coherent, consistent normative environment. What adults believe and what adults do are not far apart. So children have a clear, unambiguous signal to absorb and internalize. In many modern Western households, children are getting a fragmented signal. Fairness is important, except when it's inconvenient. Sharing is good, unless it costs me something significant. Forgiveness matters, but so does holding people accountable. None of those caveats are wrong, by the way. Life is genuinely complex, but if your child is hearing all the caveats before they have fully absorbed the core norm, you have created a gap that gets filled with the dominant cultural signal, which in competitive urban environments often defaults to maximization. Bridging the norming gap doesn't mean performing perfection for your child. It means narrating your real moral reasoning out loud. I almost didn't want to share that, and then I thought about how I'd feel if they didn't share with me, so I did it anyway. That kind of honest, visible moral processing is extraordinarily powerful. It shows your child that fairness is something you actively choose, not something that just happens automatically to good people. Principle 3, the age 8 illusion, waiting too long to start the conversation. This is perhaps the most urgent finding in the entire study, and the one most parents are not prepared for. The research found that children's cooperative behaviors and their alignment with community norms converged in middle childhood, specifically around ages 8 to 10. What that means in developmental terms is that the shaping was largely complete by that point. Children were not still openly forming their cooperative strategies at age 10. They had already formed them. Middle childhood wasn't the beginning of the process. It was the end of the active sculpting phase. The window for shaping these behaviors, the researchers concluded, appears to be before middle childhood. Before middle childhood, that means before age 8. That means the years from birth through early elementary school are not a warm-up period for the real moral education that comes later. They are the real moral education. And yet, how many parents think to themselves, they're only 4, I'll explain fairness when they're old enough to really understand it? How many parents assume that the explicit conversations about values, ethics, sharing, and cooperation can wait until their child is mature enough to engage with them intellectually? The research is telling us that the intellectual engagement is not the primary mechanism. The primary mechanism is absorption. Children are not learning about fairness by reasoning through it at age 9. They are absorbing it through thousands of repeated daily interactions from age 1 through age 7. By the time they are old enough to discuss it philosophically, the behavioral foundation is already poured. This is not a reason to panic if your child is already 8 or 9 or older. Human beings remain capable of growth and moral development throughout their lives. But the ease, the naturalness, the deep internalization, that happens in early childhood. After the convergence point, changing cooperative habits requires more deliberate effort from both parent and child. The cross-cultural data makes this even more vivid. In communities where cooperative norms are woven into the daily fabric of early childhood, where 5-year-olds participate in communal food sharing, where young children see resource distribution as a social ritual rather than a personal transaction, those cooperative values show up as deeply embodied by middle childhood. They are not rules the child is following. They are instincts the child has developed. In contrast, in communities where fairness conversations are largely deferred until children are old enough, or where early childhood environments are structured around individual play, individual meals, individual achievement, children arrive at middle childhood with a more maximizing orientation already set. This doesn't mean structured individual achievement is bad. The point is not to idealize any one cultural approach. The point is that whatever values you want your child to embody, you need to be actively, consistently, age-appropriately modeling and reinforcing them from the very beginning, not waiting for your child to be ready to have a grown-up conversation about it. Principle 4, the forgiveness paradox, confusing accountability with punishment. One of the 4 experimental tasks in this study tested forgiveness, specifically whether children would be willing to return resources to someone who had previously wronged them. This is a nuanced moral skill. Forgiveness in a partner-contingent cooperation framework does not mean ignoring bad behavior. It means being capable of extending trust again after a rupture, particularly when the other person has demonstrated changed behavior. It is distinct from simply punishing wrongdoers and distinct from unconditionally forgiving everyone regardless of what they did. And yet, many children and many adults conflate forgiveness with weakness or conflate accountability with permanent punishment. This happens in parenting culture in a very specific way. When children are wronged by another child, a toy is taken, a promise is broken, they are excluded from a game. A common parental response is to validate the child's hurt and reinforce the boundary, which is good. But then, when the other child apologizes or tries to repair the relationship, some parents, usually without realizing it, signal skepticism. Well, I'd be careful about trusting them again. They said sorry last time too, remember? The parent's intention is to protect their child, but the message the child receives is that forgiveness is naive, that once someone wrongs you, the rational response is permanent vigilance or withdrawal, and that maintaining a grudge is a form of social intelligence. The cross-cultural data in this study showed meaningful variation in forgiveness patterns across societies. In some communities, children showed much higher willingness to re-extend trust after conflict. In others, forgiveness rates were significantly lower, and those patterns correlated strongly with the adult norms of those communities, particularly how adults in those communities publicly talked about and modeled the resolution of interpersonal conflict. The parenting principle here is to teach your child the difference between accountability and permanent punishment. and to model genuine forgiveness in your own relationships. That does not mean teaching your child to be a doormat. It means showing them what it looks like to say, "What you did hurt me, I've told you why, I've heard your apology, and I'm willing to give this another try." That is not weakness. That is partner contingent social intelligence in action. And it is something children need to see modeled repeatedly in real situations before it becomes a natural part of their behavioral repertoire. Principle 5, the cultural blind spot, assuming Western norms are universal norms. This is perhaps the most intellectually important principle, and the one that requires the most intellectual humility from parents. The study found substantial cross-cultural variation in which cooperative behaviors children prioritized. Children in different societies genuinely prioritized different cooperative norms, and none of those norms were objectively wrong. They were adapted to the social and ecological demands of each community. And yet, parenting culture in the English-speaking world, the books, the podcasts, the YouTube channels, the advice columns, is overwhelmingly shaped by a weird framework. That acronym stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. Weird populations represent a small fraction of global human diversity, but they make up the vast majority of parenting research subjects and the vast majority of parenting content consumers. This matters because weird parenting norms carry implicit assumptions about what healthy cooperative development looks like, assumptions that this study directly challenges. For example, in many East Asian parenting cultures, Japan, Taiwan, China, cooperative behavior is not framed primarily as a personal virtue, but as a social obligation. You share not because it makes you feel generous, but because maintaining group harmony is a responsibility you carry. Research on Japanese preschools, for instance, consistently shows that children as young as 3 are given collective responsibilities, cleaning the classroom, serving meals to peers, caring for class pets, not as enrichment activities, but as normative expectations of what it means to be part of a community. In Malaysia, among many communities, the concept of gotong royong, communal mutual aid, is taught not as an abstract value, but as a lived practice children participate in from early childhood. Sharing resources is not framed as generosity. It is framed as simply what people do for each other. In the Dutch parenting tradition, there is a concept that researchers often highlight, the emphasis on what the Dutch call gezelligheid, a sense of warm, cooperative togetherness. Dutch children are consistently found in international studies to be among the happiest, and researchers point to the cultural de-emphasis on individual achievement in early childhood as a significant factor. None of these approaches are without their own challenges or trade-offs, but they represent genuinely different architectures for how cooperative values are transmitted, architectures that produce meaningfully different behavioral outcomes, as this 5-society study clearly demonstrates. The parenting takeaway is not to wholesale adopt another culture's approach. It is to hold your own cultural assumptions more lightly. When you find yourself thinking, "That's just how kids are," or "It's natural for children to be selfish at this age," ask yourself whether you are describing a developmental universal or a cultural norm that your particular environment has produced. Because this research suggests that in many cases, it is the latter. Principle 6, the honesty connection. Fairness and truth-telling are linked. One of the 4 experimental tasks in this study tested honesty, specifically whether children would accurately report resource counts when they had an incentive to lie. And the researchers found meaningful connections between children's honesty patterns and their broader cooperative strategies. This connection matters for parents because fairness and honesty are not separate moral domains. They are deeply intertwined. A child who understands fairness at a deep level, who genuinely grasps the reciprocal logic of why we treat each other equitably, is also a child who understands why honesty matters. Both fairness and honesty require the capacity to hold someone else's interests in mind alongside your own. Maximizing children, those oriented primarily toward getting the best outcome for themselves, showed higher rates of dishonesty when honesty was costly. This is not surprising. If your operative logic is personal optimization, then lying when it benefits you is simply part of the strategy. Partner contingent cooperators, on the other hand, showed a more nuanced pattern. They were honest with partners they trusted and had reason to maintain a relationship with, because they understood that a reputation for honesty is itself a cooperative resource. Long-term honesty serves the partner contingent cooperator because it builds the trust that makes future cooperation possible. The parenting implication is powerful. How you teach fairness is how you teach honesty. They are not separate lessons. If your child understands, really understands, through experience, not just instruction, that social relationships are built on reciprocal trust, and that fairness is the mechanism by which that trust is maintained, then honesty follows naturally as the logical extension of that framework. This is why simply punishing lying rarely produces lasting honest behavior. You have addressed the symptom without addressing the underlying cooperative orientation. A child who is genuinely oriented toward partner contingent cooperation doesn't primarily avoid lying because they fear punishment. They avoid lying because they understand that deception corrodes the trust that makes cooperative relationships possible, and they value those relationships. Building that understanding requires years of consistent, age-appropriate modeling and conversation. It begins in the very early years, long before your child can articulate any of this philosophically. And it is built not through lectures about the importance of honesty, but through a household culture where trust, reciprocity, and fair dealing are genuinely and consistently practiced. Now let's talk about what you can actually do with all of this, starting this week. First, audit your household's cooperative culture, not your stated values, your actual daily practices. How is food shared at your table? How are decisions made? When someone in your family is treated unfairly, what happens? Is the process of resolving that modeled out loud, or does it happen behind closed doors? Children need to see the full arc of fairness in action: the hurt, the naming of the unfairness, the discussion, and the resolution. Second, deliberately narrate your own moral reasoning to your child, not as a lesson, as a running commentary on real life. I wasn't sure whether to split that equally or give more to the person who needed it more. What do you think? You are not just teaching fairness. You are teaching your child that fairness requires active thought, and that thinking about it out loud together is something you do. Third, if your child is under 8, treat right now as the critical window, not with panic, with intention. The small daily choices about how resources are shared, how conflicts are resolved, and how cooperation is praised or overlooked are the actual curriculum. Make it a conscious one. Fourth, expand your child's cultural lens on fairness. Read books featuring children from other cultures navigating cooperation and sharing. Talk about the different ways families and communities around the world make decisions together. Research consistently shows that children who are exposed to diverse models of cooperation develop more flexible and sophisticated cooperative strategies. And fifth, this is the most important one. Check the norming gap. Write down 3 values around fairness and cooperation that you want your child to internalize. Then honestly assess, in the last week, how many times did your behavior model exactly that? If there's a gap, you don't need to be perfect, but you do need to name the gap to yourself and start closing it, one real interaction at a time. If this video made you think differently about how you're shaping your child's sense of fairness, please subscribe to Smart Start Parents. We go deep on real research every single week, so you have the science you need to make confident parenting decisions. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Which of the 5 societies in this study surprised you the most? And did anything about your own cultural background make you rethink the fairness messages your child might be absorbing at home? Leave your answer below. I read every single one.